We are back, ladies and gents, diving into another season of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. We had a big premiere night with the first 3 episodes of the season all dropping, so let's dive in and get right to it. Real quick, if you enjoy Middle-earth, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell so you don't miss future Rings of Power breakdowns, film coverage, gaming, and of course my weekly lore videos here on Nerd of the Rings. After a previously on segment, mostly recapping Season 1 in about 3.5 minutes, we get our first shot of Season 2, which is an orc carrying a pretty sweet, evil-looking crown. And during this time, we hear a voice talking about how when the shadow is defeated, it takes a new shape and grows again. Now, for the benefit of us watching and maybe any orcs that, haven't met him before, he introduces himself as Sauron. We get a title card that this is Forodwaith, the lands to the far north of Middle-earth. This land is also commonly known as the Northern Waste. We are told this is the dawn of the Second Age, so immediately after Morgoth is defeated by the Valar and cast into the Void. While Sauron would come to be synonymous with Mordor by the late Third Age, the choice of Forodwaith does make a bit of sense here, as Morgoth's strongholds were always in the northern portions of Middle-earth, as we can see on this combined map of Beleriand and Middle-earth. Sauron says he seeks a new kind of power, not of the flesh but over flesh, power of the unseen world. We've heard these words before in Season 1 when Adar is talking to Galadriel, and we see Adar witness these words here. While harnessing the power of the unseen world doesn't really mean a whole lot lore-wise, there is some apparent connection with the ring magic that Sauron concocts, as the unseen is where the ring wraiths will one day primarily exist. Sauron talks about enslaving Middle-earth, which sounds pretty good to the orcs, but then follows that up with many orcs will die, which seems like a not great hype speech method. Still, it seems a pretty reasonable assumption if they're going to be enslaving all Middle-earth. This leads to an orc going straight into mutiny, which seems maybe a bit bold and hasty. After an orc says in black speech, Sauron lies, the Dark Lord points out that they have nowhere else to turn, then thwarts the assassination attempt quite brutally. Sauron loses control a bit, and we see his veins around his eyes go all black like Halbrand did at the end of Season 1. Adar makes as if to crown Sauron, but turns it upside down, stabbing him, and the orcs join in. Sauron puts up quite a fight, but in the end, his body is slain. Now we hear some whispered black speech as Sauron's body dies, but when prodded, a huge flash of light emanates from the corpse, making the entire fortress and the land surrounding it the icy locations Galadriel came across at the beginning of Season 1. When we turn back, we see Sauron's body is gone, and we see black blood oozing down the crevices of the floor. Now, this is where I can't help but think back to Season 1's prologue, which showed Sauron becoming master of the orcs, and he's in full-on intimidating evil form. During that portion of the prologue, Galadriel tells how the orcs spread out to every corner of Middle-earth, multiplying under Morgoth's most devoted servant, Sauron. So perhaps this is a bit of a retcon from what we saw in Season 1. It would seem more logical for Sauron to appear to the orcs in his domineering form, and for the orcs to fall in line under him, as he is Morgoth's chief lieutenant. That being said, the idea that orcs would not take seriously a fair form of Sauron is not wholly foreign to the lore. In Nature of Middle-earth, Tolkien talks about the orcs from the east, who had not experienced the power and terror of the elves or the valor of the Edain, not being subservient to Sauron, and that, while he was obliged for the cousining of Western men and elves to wear as fair a form and countenance as he could, they, being the orcs, despised him and laughed at him. Now back to the show, Adar takes leadership of the orcs, and we then get a montage of symbiote Sauron crawling and eating his way through Middle-earth inch by inch. In the books, we do know that it takes Sauron a significant time to regain his physical form if it is destroyed, and each time that it happens, it takes longer to regenerate. The first of these coming in the fall of Numenor. Although I must admit, I always kind of pictured it being more disembodied spirit and less oozy. Sauron latches onto an unfortunate cart driver, but for the animal lovers, at least the horse got away. This enables him to take a human form once again. Sauron comes across some refugees from orc attacks and has a nice little conversation with an old guy about turning to a new path. And we find out that the pouch Halbrand carried all during Season 1 is carried by this guy, who's a descendant of the servants of the Southland kings. I gotta say, his part is really short, but I rather enjoyed this character, who we find is indeed the dead man Sauron took the pouch from, though he was very much alive when Sauron took it. As someone who really hoped the whole repentant Sauron thing was a ruse in Season 1, it was nice to see the villainous bits in the early going here. Him taking the pouch and leaving the guy for dead, and the evil smirk when Galadriel shows up gives me hope that it's all part of his manipulation. We also see Sauron seemingly have some power over the fish dragon, making it leave instead of attack. This naturally makes you wonder if he somehow summoned it in Season 1 when it attacks the raft. We then get the title card for the show, and I was like, holy smokes, we're like 20 minutes in here. That's kinda wild. Quick note on the title card, rather than the straight gold logo, this time we have a green lettering with gold accents throughout. Next we see Galadriel chasing Elrond on horseback, trying to get the 3 rings from him. Turns out they're racing to Gil-galad to go tell on each other. Real quick, they pass this tree that kinda reminded me of the one Frodo sits in Fellowship of the Ring, but I did a quick glance and confirmed it's not the same tree. Still, I always enjoy a nice tree. Also, I gotta feel bad for these horses racing all the way from Eregion to Lindon. That's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 500 miles. When Galadriel arrives, she's greeted by guards. Elrond beat her there, so she gets escorted to the king. Along the way, we can see a lot of leaves on the ground. So not only are the leaves of the main tree of Lindon falling, but the entire forest is giving off the autumn vibes. Presumably this is a symptom of the larger problem and not just a simple changing of the seasons. Elrond and Galadriel tattle on each other. Galadriel says Elrond has rings that will fix their tree problems, and Elrond has already told on Galadriel, having hid Halbrand's true identity from them. Now this is a part of the show that I've been really curious to see play out. How will the show handle Galadriel lying about Sauron's identity to her fellow elves? Even in this scene, we see her trying not to fess up to it, and it was nice to see Gil-galad call her out on this. She finally reveals Halbrand was actually Sauron, and I kinda love how Gil-galad is just like, gah, like he's thinking, you gotta be freaking kidding me. Elrond asks, how could you? And when Galadriel says she was deceived, Elrond fires back, you were blinded by your own pride. And I gotta say, I was pretty glad to hear Elrond say this, cause it's pretty accurate. Just my opinion, but I didn't find Season 1 Galadriel to be a very likable hero, and I've been hoping that there would come a pivot point in her arc where we could see her start aligning more with what we'd expect of such a great character from the books. I said this in Season 1, but I think Elrond and their relationship will play a role in that turn. Galadriel comes back saying Elrond failed at Khazad-dûm, which, if I think we're keeping score, not securing a medal from a hostile king versus helping return the Dark Lord to power might not be the scoring contest Galadriel wants to open up here. Gil-galad rather quickly, I must say, comes around to the idea that they must risk using the rings for the sake of all Middle-earth, because if the elves don't heal the tree, they'll have to leave, which means abandoning the men and dwarves to whatever evil Sauron is cooking up. And briefly, they kinda touch on an interesting element of the 3 rings from the books. They aren't made with Sauron's direct involvement, but they are made using the methods Celebrimbor learns from Annatar. Essentially, what this means is that they exist in this odd middle ground. They are actually good and positively preserve the elven lands where their bearers reside, this being Rivendell and Lorien later in the story. However, since they're made with the same craft, they are under the control of the One Ring. So when Sauron ultimately makes his ruling ring, the elves will not be able to use their 3. Elrond tells Gil-galad that Sauron has not amassed forces to conquer Middle-earth yet, and that these rings may in fact be how he gains power, which I must say seems like a reasonable concern to have. Gil-galad then kinda puts Elrond down, saying the decision is basically above his pay grade, and that he risks his position by not obeying. Elrond realizes he is clearly the smartest person in the room and decides to exit the room by jumping off the cliff into the waters below. I like that Galadriel seems to realize what Elrond is about to do a split second before he jumps. Now this action taken by Elrond could very well be a reference to a famous part of his mother's story. Elwing, who possessed one of the Silmarils, basically the troublemaking precious objects of the First Age, jumps from a precipice into the sea rather than be captured by the Sons of Feanor during the Third Kinslaying. She's transformed into a bird by the Vala Ulmo, the Lord of Waters, so that she may fly to reunite with her husband Eärendil. Unlike his mother though, presumably Elrond just goes for a bit of a swim. Next we cut to a shot of Mount Doom as we get our first look at Season 2 Mordor. Sauron has gone and got himself captured by the orcs, and in the previous wide shot we see some orcs snacking on a delicious Númenórean horse. We find creepy old dude Waldreg is Adar's hype man and tells all the captured humans to bow to Adar, or as we see with the first dude, get stabbed through the gut. Once they swear allegiance, they get a brand on the back of their neck of what in Season 1 was thought to be Sauron's symbol, but it turned out to be a rudimentary map of Mordor. Here once again we get Adar face to face with Sauron, though the former doesn't know it. And I gotta say, I think this works far better when we as the audience know this guy to be Sauron. Rather than guessing along with the mystery box, we can see how he's pushing buttons and manipulating people in these early episodes. For instance, here he not only dangles the carrot of having information about a great sorcerer, but says how Galadriel sought out this person because of what Adar said about power over flesh. It's not enough that he just has information about Sauron, but he brings this blow that Adar's own words led Galadriel to seek out Sauron's aid. This is the kind of manipulation I was hoping to see in a Second Age Sauron, and I really hope to see it continue throughout the season and the series. I also really appreciate Sauron's reaction to Adar's threat, explaining his value, but when he delivers the line, "You can't kill me," we know the hidden meaning here. Adar tried, but Sauron is much more than a mortal man or even an elf, and no mere blades will destroy him. They throw Sauron in prison and Adar reassures an orc that Sauron is dead, but you can pretty much tell he's not really sure about that. Real quick, I gotta say I think Sam Hazeldine is thus far doing a good job with the Adar character. Taking over a role is never the easiest task, especially after Joseph Mall was one of the standout performances of Season 1. That being said, I think Sam has brought a lot of consistency in the voice and performance here to make the transition easy for viewers, which is great. Next up, we get a brief dream sequence of the Stranger. More thoughts on his identity on the way in my episode 2 breakdown, by the way. Here he finds a staff sticking out of the ground, and when he grabs it, he gets quick flashes of visions, all of which feature in episode 2. First, there's magma in Mount Doom, followed by the other wizard in the east, hands being sliced by a knife, and himself and Nori in a dust storm of some kind. Nori and the Stranger chat about his dreams, and we see they're being watched by someone in a gold mask. Nori says they're lost and that they're going in circles, which admittedly would seem kind of hard to do in a desert area like this, but I guess following your nose might sometimes lead you back to where you came from. They're running low on food, so Nori convinces the Stranger to attempt his tree healing trick, and he makes her move really far back so he doesn't risk hurting her. We hear him say, "Atule qui viena." This essentially translates from Quenya to, "Oh come, healing." Unfortunately, this does not do the trick as the tree explodes. Fortunately, a bunch of huge bugs come out of the stump, so they do have something to eat. They bond over their bug feast, and the Stranger has what is probably one of my favorite lines in this episode, saying, "That which is left behind can be the heaviest burden to carry." It's quite a lovely quote and sentiment. He goes on to talk about his home that he can't remember, saying it's just beyond the sunset. He is certainly talking about Valinor here, as the sunset in Middle-earth, like our own, is in the west. So whatever he's vaguely feeling but not quite remembering is definitely Valinor, where the wizards originated and not whatever lies to the east. Next up, we see Sauron get some FaceTime with the rabid warg, which will come into play later. Waldreg shimmies in and continues to be a jerk to Sauron, which is kind of ironic, since he was all desperate to ally with Sauron last season. After getting beaten by Waldreg, Sauron uses the food to get a jump scare from the warg. Now, I gotta think that him appearing all banged up and weak is him playing it up. I mean, we just saw the dude in the opening scene take like 15 stabs and keep on fighting. As the warg is gnawing on the bone, Sauron starts speaking black speech and seems to take command of the animal. Now, black speech is one of those Tolkien languages with very little written in it, so this is some form of neo-black speech derived for the show. I couldn't pick up any words I immediately recognized, except perhaps the suffix uk, which means all. Back in Elven lands, we get our first look at the Grey Havens in this adaptation, which as we can see is much smaller than the one that we saw in the Return of the King film. To be fair, they still have at least a few thousand years till that point in the timeline, but they've already been hanging out here for 1,000, so they're gonna have to pick up the pace if they're gonna catch up to that. In addition to a lighthouse, we can see there's a few elven ships bearing the same swan design elements we've seen previously. Some soldiers ride through looking for Elrond, who's hiding under a bridge. Then we get our first introduction to a huge canon character, Círdan the Shipwright. We see him moving along, guiding other elves in making their ships by hand, and he points out that perfection is only found in Valinor. No doubt those only familiar with film and TV adaptations will notice Círdan is unique in that he has a beard. This is no odd choice, as Círdan was one of only 2 elves in history to have a beard. This is because he's so ancient that he's well into his 3rd cycle of life, where such a thing is possible for elves. Indeed, he is so old that he was born at Cuiviénen, the awakening place of the first elves. Yet he would never set foot in Valinor until the last ship would depart the Grey Havens, well into the 4th Age. His is an amazing tale of putting aside personal desires in favor of serving others. For more, check out my video on Círdan here. We get an ever so slight hint of his longing for the sea, and to sail to Valinor in this shot of him looking to the sunset. Círdan discovers Elrond hiding out in the boathouse and perceives Elrond carrying something louder than the sea. We then get a short clip of Gil-galad sending a messenger to Celebrimbor with the message, "Halbrand is Sauron." Personally, I think I probably would have sent more than 2 messengers if the fate of the world hung in the balance, but admittedly, I am not a High King. Here we get Galadriel and Gil-galad having it out a bit, as the High King kinda took Galadriel's side earlier with Elrond. Galadriel almost thanks him, but Gil-galad points out that the reality is Galadriel's actions put them in a position where they had no choice but to test the virtue of the rings. Gil-galad name drops the Ettenmoors, which are the mountainous area north of what will soon be Rivendell. Also called the Trollfells, it is named after the large creatures. Galadriel turns to go, and as she turns back, she gets that kind of crazy look that usually precedes her doing something rash or insulting. But instead, we get kind of this nice moment of understanding between the two. Galadriel says she won't stop until she puts this right and destroys Sauron, and Gil-galad says she wouldn't be here if he thought otherwise. Galadriel figures out that Elrond would go to someone trustworthy and wise. We then get a really nice scene between Círdan and Elrond. Círdan talks about Celebrimbor wishing to create objects that could change hearts, and that perhaps if these rings had turned elf against elf, he succeeded. And I gotta say, at this point, I'm really digging Círdan's portrayal so far. In the Return of the King book, Círdan is described by the following. Very tall he was, and his beard was long, and he was gray and old, save that his eyes were keen as stars. So far, I think we're mostly seeing a Círdan that is wise from years beyond count. He doesn't even wish to look on the rings. He seems almost above these squabbles, even if it's around the fate of the world. They have this really great moment where Círdan points out that the elves will cease and abandon Middle-earth if the rings are destroyed. And Elrond says if the alternative is falling prey to Sauron's designs, then he's okay with that. And in response, Círdan says Elrond does his father proud. Galadriel shows up to find Círdan has already sailed out with the rings, to cast them into a deep underwater chasm made by the breaking of Beleriand in the War of Wrath that ended the First Age. Cut back to the stranger in Nori and they're being followed, but it turns out to just be Poppy. Which checks out because only a Harfoot would fall for this particular booby trap. Ironically, I gave the show a bit of credit last year for not doing the I'm Coming Too with Poppy and Nori, but I guess now they did. Turns out Poppy's Wandering Day song last season has hidden meaning that guides you to Rhûn. Naturally, this makes me wonder if they would sing it in reverse to go back. It was nice to hear the music of that song again though, as it was one of the musical highlights of season 1 in my opinion. They made it to Rhûn and the stranger says he's been there only in dreams, and we see they're still being followed by the weird helmet guys. One of them hops on a horse and we see a symbol that sure looks like an eye. No doubt this conjures theories of this being the Eye of Sauron. In the books, Sauron repeatedly flees to the east when needing to regain his power. In fact, it's to the east that Sauron goes rather than Forodwaith at the end of the First Age, as he bides his time to take over as the new Dark Lord. Now, it sure seems as though this version of Sauron hasn't had time to go to the east based on what we've seen thus far. It seems like his time has been pretty occupied between getting killed at the dawn of the Second Age, oozing around, then landing on the shipwreck. Still, one can hope that we get an east influenced by Sauron somehow. Círdan goes to drop the rings into the sea and a wave splashes the boat, leading him to look at them. Sauron sees the shot of the orcs from when they killed him, then wakes up to find Adar, who tells him a story about drinking wine with Sauron. He says he was chained at a dark and nameless peak, which I initially thought to be Thangorodrim, the mountains where Morgoth's fortress of Angband is located. This could still be the case, though it would have been a great name drop moment with a name that does appear in The Lord of the Rings, so presumably without rights issues to consider. And this would not be the first time someone is chained to Thangorodrim. Feanor's son Maithros hangs by the hand from the peak for years before his rescue. One thing I wasn't really clear on is why Adar was chained to the peak in the first place, and why Sauron offering him wine when first meeting him was bad. Sauron then proposes Adar let him go so that he can use the elves to seek out Sauron, while Adar marshals his legions to destroy him. No doubt this is him planning to use the elves and orcs to destroy one another, hoping to remove leaders of both in one fell swoop. Waldreg steps back in to do his hype man duties, and Sauron swears allegiance to the Lord of Mordor to the end of my days and his, and smirks at the camera. It's quite a roundabout way of not swearing allegiance to Adar but to himself, and getting in a dig about the end of Adar's life. Sauron leaves, and Adar says to make sure he's followed. Then creepy old Waldreg comes in to discover the warg's collar on Sauron's bed, which is a kind of awesome way for him to get taken out, by the very master he wanted so badly to serve in Season 1. I kinda love that Sauron just smiles when hearing the screaming too. We then hear Gil-galad singing about the end of the elves in Middle-earth, when Círdan shows up sporting new jewelry, Narya, the Ring of Fire. He amends his earlier statement, saying that perfection isn't just in Valinor, but that Celebrimbor has made it. While Círdan sports Narya, Nenya, the Ring of Water, falls to Galadriel's feet and she puts it on. Gil-galad then puts on Vilya, the Ring of Air, and we see the lighting change along with the tree being healed. We can see the black goo being kind of burned off as well. A quick note, the black goo does have some resemblance to Sauron in symbiote form earlier, so maybe this is an indication that all of this was just Sauron playing 3D chess. Elrond seems torn by all this and departs, as the bearers of the three hold out their hands comparing their bling. It's a real dilemma set forth by this show forging the rings out of order. While in the books they make the rings for selfish reasons, they are completely duped by Sauron, and we kind of have the opposite thing happening here. There's certainly an element at play here of the elves willingly playing into Sauron's plan that still doesn't quite sit right with me. Hopefully now that this healing is done with, the show can kind of merge back onto the road and align closer with the canon tale. Next up, we see Celebrimbor and his team firing up their brand new forge, while hoping the rings work so they can remain in Middle-earth. Turns out a messenger has come, not from Lindon, but the Southlands. Sauron has returned to Eregion, and the episode ends hanging on the question of whether Celebrimbor will grant him entry. And we'll see in episode 2 how Sauron seeks to gain a foothold in Eregion and move forward with his Rings of Power scheme. And there we have it, folks, 1 episode down, 7 more to go this season. What did you think of episode 1? As usual, I'll save my review to the end of the season, but I gotta say I really enjoyed Círdan, and I think the show did acknowledge some of the things I felt it needed to with Galadriel. There's a lot that feels off to me in regards to the situation around the 3 rings, but we'll see how that goes. I'm intrigued by Sauron's machinations, and I'm eager to see this play out in future episodes. As always, let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to check out my breakdowns after each episode, including episode 2 and 3 from this week. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.